Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. The webinar will begin shortly. It will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we'd love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the conversation to respond to the questions you post. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed on Friday to all who registered. And we are also live streaming this session on our Facebook page. We will be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Finally, before we start, I would just like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars, including sessions in our regular 3 p.m. Eastern time slot and frequent sessions in this earlier 12:30 time slot as well. These sessions continue our focus on reducing learning loss and accelerating equitable learning recovery. Later today, we will have a conversation on the centrality of relationships, exploring how tutors, mentors, and coaches can be leveraged to support students' learning and strengthen relationships between parents and teachers. Next week, we will have another double header with a peer exchange exploring how GLR communities are working to ensure digital access for all children in the 12:30 time slot, and a session co-sponsored by New America, exploring what is behind the 10% drop in kindergarten enrollment nationwide and how district leaders are responding. Finally, we'll be kicking off October with another double header with a special funder-to-funder conversation that acknowledges the emotional trauma and daunting challenges of the many layered disasters affecting communities across the country in the 12:30 time slot. Later that day, we'll have another session in partnership with Education Week and the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy, lifting up the foundational nature of trauma-informed practices in the construction of the deep reading brain at 3 p.m. on October 5th. Registration links for these upcoming sessions are posted in the chat box. Joining you now is Sarah Torian, a senior consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's Funder-to-Funder conversation entitled Assume a Collaboration, Philanthropic Opportunities for Aggregating Impact. For those of you who might be new to the Funder-to-Funder conversations, I'll just quickly share that we launched this funder-focused series about a year ago in response to requests from the local funders in our network who shared an interest for more opportunities to come together with state, local, and national funders to learn with and from each other while exploring opportunities for increased alignment, coordination, and yes, collaboration. These sessions are rooted in the recognition of the vital roles played by local philanthropy in ensuring the healthy development and early school success for young children. They are designed to lift up and align the unique assets of both local and national funders. The local knowledge, networks, earned credibility, and trusting relationships that local funders bring to this work, and the increased access to experts, and the latest research, and the larger funding capacity of national funders. Today's conversation is a perfect example of the ways in which local and national funders can and do complement each other as they work to encourage collaboration among both service providers and among other funders. Even before the pandemic, it was clear that intentional and effective collaboration across programs and across sectors would be required to achieve bigger, better outcomes that are both scalable and sustainable for children experiencing economic disadvantage. By connecting, quilting, braiding, and weaving effective programs and approaches, by taking a whole child, whole family, whole community approach that includes the wide range of supports and services that contribute to a child's success, by creating an ecosystem or a grid of supports and services, and by taking the time to build strong, trusting relationships that acknowledge the vital roles played by each partner. In short, by collaborating, we can ensure that all children have access to the high-quality services they need in the appropriate dosage, sequence, and duration to help them succeed and thrive. Today's conversation brings together leaders in philanthropy at both the local and national level and leading service providers who will share their insights about the benefits of collaboration, the barriers that can sometimes impede collaboration, and their lessons learned along the way. And to begin that conversation, I am incredibly honored to welcome and introduce our panel for today. First, we have Brenda Blasingame. Brenda joined the JB and MK Pritzker Family Foundation in 2020 as a program officer on the Pritzker Children's Initiative, where her work is focused on strategy development in the areas of child well-being and child welfare prevention, work with and in the Latinx and Native American communities, lived experience, and parent community leadership and justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. Also joining us today is Rebecca Suzik. Rebecca serves as Vice President of Organizational Learning and Effectiveness for the Bainham Family Foundation in Washington, D.C. Previously, she has worked as a clinician educator, as Director of Sports Medicine at University of San Francisco, and in Learning and Development at the Target Corporation. I'm also delighted to welcome and introduce Celine Coggins, currently serving as the Executive Director of Grantmakers for Education. Celine was an educator for more than 2 decades before founding and leading Teach Plus, a nationwide network of top-performing teachers. She's also held a number of education policy leadership roles, including assistant to the Massachusetts Commissioner of Education. Welcome also to Catherine Carell. Catherine serves as Principal for Philanthropic Partnerships at LENA, where she manages LENA's philanthropic strategy from all sides, including partnership and project development, fundraising, and formation of evaluation metrics. She has worked in a variety of university and nonprofit settings in education and healthcare. I'm also happy to welcome and introduce Anu Malapatil. Anu is Vice President of Education at the Overdeck Family Foundation, having previously served as a Regents Research Fund Fellow at the New York State Education Department, where she shaped the state's $70 million Race to the Top effort. Welcome also to Sarah McBroom. Sarah is an equity officer at the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, where she oversees the implementation of the foundation's strategies within its major initiatives, Excel by 8, which is Arkansas's grade level reading campaign, Forward Arkansas, and Grow Our Own. And finally, welcome to Natalie Tackett. Natalie works with the Policy and Finance team and the Training and Technical Assistance team for the Healthy Steps National Office at 0 to 3. She leads Healthy Steps efforts throughout North Carolina with specific focus on a collaborative effort to create systems change in Guilford County, working in close coordination with other evidence-based programs and strategic community partners. What a rock star panel. Thank you and welcome to you all. I'd like to start with you, Celine, if we could. There you are. As I just shared, today's conversation is all about strengthening collaboration, how funders and providers can align, connect, and braid their collective efforts to ensure that all children and families have access to high-quality services at the appropriate sequence, dosage, and duration. So from your vantage point, leading a member network of nearly 300 education funders, I'm hoping that you can kind of provide that macro level perspective for us to get the conversation started. What are some of the trends that you're seeing of funder partnerships and collaborations?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, Sarah. The way you just described these funder to funder conversations is very similar to the way that we do our work at GFE. So the purpose of what we do is to connect funders, to allow for that sense making, to allow for the trend spotting. And no time has it ever been more important than in this ongoing pandemic. I think all of us thought we'd be in a very different place this fall. And we continue to say, okay, so if we didn't, if this moment isn't what we thought, where do we go from here? And so we're having lots of these conversations, and we're also doing periodic surveying of our members. And so oftentimes, as I speak today, I'll be referencing a report that we did that I'll stick into the chat after I speak. It's called The Big Vision for the Next Stage of Education Philanthropy. So we asked funders, several hundred, what are you seeing? Where do you see the field going? We know this is a moment of inflection. We know that kind of everything that we thought we knew about the purpose of education has changed, and the way we do education has changed. And so I'll talk a little bit about what I see in terms of the process of collaboration among funders. I'll talk a little bit about the content that I see, and then I'll note just a few tensions that I see funders trying to manage right now together. All right, so when it comes to the process, we're seeing what it sounds like you're seeing. There has been a lot of attention, a lot of kind of coherence in where we see funders kind of moving their attention during the pandemic. And so I want to kind of build on this notion that there are places where funders are going and working together. It started with just making sure kids had food, making sure kids were safe. And that has kind of evolved over the course of the pandemic. So I'll get more into the content in a minute, but that kind of coherence is there. Next, I think I heard you saying with the campaign for grade level reading, there's a lot of connection between national and local funders. I think that has grown. It's become more important. It's really, really, I think, especially important for national funders to hear what's happening on the ground. That changes moment to moment. And so that connection between local and national funders has never been more important. And then I just want to note in terms of process that I see lots of attempts among funders to be breaking through kind of traditional boundaries. So one example is we have kind of in-school time and out-of-school time. And, when all school time was happening remotely, we realized those are just two different learning environments where we're trying to accomplish the same goals. And so we see a really robust group of traditionally out of school time funders saying, how can we help with the enterprise of school? And how do we think about these things together as complementary rather than separate? So that's a little bit about process. In terms of content, I'll say there are some things that are really kind of emerging as important. And these are things that that kind of fall into one umbrella, I'd say. The big umbrella is, learning is not just about the content, it's about relationships. And so when we surveyed our members, what are your big priorities over the next few years as we come out of this pandemic? Racial justice was number one by far and away. And the number one thing when we drilled down on that, we saw funders saying, resource equity, making sure that schools get the resources that they need, that, we close the gaps between majority Black and brown schools that receive far less funding than majority white schools. And so that is instrumental to helping make sure all kids get an equitable education and read on grade level. Second is social and emotional learning. So that was pre-pandemic. This was a rising issue. It has exploded during the pandemic. So no kid is going to read unless they have a secure environment, unless they feel a sense of efficacy. Those pieces of the puzzle are things that funders are really looking into and trying to help support kind of our evolution on. And then last is a real interest among funders on the future of hybrid learning. So, we're all excited. I'm very excited that my kids are not in my house today. But at the same time, there are things that we can learn online. There are digital technologies that can enhance, the whole notion of reinforcing what you learn with a teacher. So those three, racial justice, social and emotional learning, and the future of hybrid learning, are biggies. I will kind of put a caution there and say, we see far less funder interest in kind of traditional academic subjects, in kind of innovations in literacy, in making sure everyone knows how to teach literacy well, and also assessment. And so, if we don't know how kids are doing, we can't know if they're on grade level. And so those pushes away from the academic. I think we're in a pendulum swing. It's probably appropriate. I would hope the pendulum doesn't swing too far. And then lastly, I'll conclude with a few tensions that I see funders managing. One is an interest in playing a really high leverage role, lots of funder collaboration, but still the federal role right now, federal dollars are really swamping what we see coming in from kind of funders. And so how do you manage that? Number two is kind of wanting to think big in this moment. Funders recognize this as a major kind of moment of change, but they're working with districts that are exhausted, where managing the day-to-day, who has to go home because they've been a close contact, is really all that we can manage, losing teachers and things like that. And then funders want to make sure that we are, kind of setting the conditions to be able to know what worked and didn't, that we put into place now, 5 years from now. And at the same time, as I just mentioned, districts and states are often moving away from testing kids. And so these are some tensions that I see that I think are going to be germane to the conversation. And hopefully that gives us enough to get going.
That is wonderful. I love kind of the overview, kind of the background around trends towards collaboration among education funders, but also responding to this moment in time where, COVID-19 has disrupted everything, and education funders kind of grappling with where they're putting their priorities and what they're going to lift up and focus on in this moment. Really appreciate that. Now I'd like to invite the four funders on our panel into the conversation for today. Thank you. So I'm really excited to hear about some of the concrete ways that your foundations are promoting collaboration among grantees, both at the national level and at the state and local level. But before we do that, I'd like to start with our two national funders today, Brenda Blasingame at the Pritzker Children's Initiative and Anu Malapatil at Overdeck, to help us kind of set the stage for the conversation today by explaining how your foundations came to this focus on promoting collaboration through your funding, and what are some of the strategies that you're using to strengthen grantee and funder collaboration? Maybe we could start with you, Brenda, to get us kicked off. Can you tell us a little bit about the Pritzker Children's Initiative and how it came to embrace collaboration in its work in its focus communities and states?
Sure. Hi, Sarah. Hello, everybody. So it's really interesting the way that you phrased this question, because the Pritzker Children's Initiative is about the prenatal to 3 stage of life. So we are unapologetic about the fact that our focus is on infants and toddlers and pregnant people. And so part of our strategy is a state community strategy. And it's specifically focused on prenatal to 3 systems. So the fact that we're focusing on systems absolutely means that this is about building this big tent and bringing a lot of people to the table to work together. I find it really interesting that we talk and use the word collaboration a lot, when I think we're really thinking about, I like to think of it as small c and small I collective impact, because in the collective impact definition, we talk about intentional ways of working together. So from the get-go, we set it up that this was about, there was a planning grant before there was an implementation grant. That planning grant was for 6 months or 12 months, and it was all about building this table and a coalition and a collaborative around prenatal to 3. So it was actually embedded just in even the concept of the work we were doing, because we were focusing on systems building. And what we did was we put a lot of different things in the mix there that people could use. And I think the most important piece of what we've done is around the capacity building that's open not just to the agency that is funded, but to the whole coalition. So the whole group, so all those different groups sitting at the table have access to that kind of support that we're providing to our grantee partner. So that's just a little pinch of what we're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate the pinch. So turning to you now, Anu, how is Overdeck? I'm sorry, I've heard that. So turning to you now, Anu, how is Overdeck supporting collaboration as a way to build an ecosystem that makes the whole greater than the sum of the parts?
Thanks for the question, Sarah, and nice to see you, you all. I'll just start with a quick framing of sort of the Overdeck Family Foundation, what we aim to do, and then we'll speak a little bit to the collaboration pieces. And Brenda, thanks for the framing on your work at Pritzker. One of the big differences of our work at Overdeck is that because our work is national in scope and covers early childhood through K-12, and we have a really both a broad content spectrum as well as a broad set of approaches. So if you go to the next slide, I thought I could just highlight this quote from Darren Walker, which really highlights the importance of working collaboratively with others, co-creating strategies that get us to shared solutions, and really seeing collective work as a public good. And one of the roles that I'll speak to in just a minute is really helping bring more investors and a pool of investors to the table. One of the things about our work that's important to share is that we really, we describe our work as a venture-inspired philanthropy. We do 2 types of investing. We invest in direct impact organizations that deliver programs and services to kids and families directly. We also invest in ecosystem and system efforts, as Brenda spoke to some of the system pieces. We do both of those pieces. And so the collaboration is just even so much more critical to think about how do we get our ecosystem partners to support and strengthen the work of our direct impact providers. So on the next slide, we really aim to do 3 key things in our work to support collaboration. For our direct service providers, our direct impact providers, we really do what we can to help scale and grow sustainable organizations, cost-effective organizations. And so what that looks like in this first bullet here on the left is really supporting our organizations to grow their reach, to reach more kids and more families, or to strengthen their understanding of their impact, or strengthen the way that they deliver impact for kids. And that could look like supporting program evaluation or research and understanding an organization's ability to deliver impact. The second key thing that we do is actually try to bring our providers together, our direct impact providers, our ecosystem providers, so that they can actually have a shared dialogue around the work. And so they can really proactively and reactively understand the ways that they can collectively achieve bigger goals together. And then the third that I mentioned earlier is that once we sort of bring grantees into the fold or find ways to collaborate between direct impact and ecosystem providers, we really think it's a big contribution that we can provide to the sector by bringing more funders to the table to understand and to see the great work that our grantees are doing. So that's a little bit of a snippet on our work.
Thank you. I like that kind of overview of the buckets of the 3 different ways that you go about supporting and encouraging collaboration. So thinking about these 3 ways, the grow, reach, strengthen, impact, build community and skills, and growing the pool of investors, can you share a couple of concrete examples about what this actually looks like on the ground?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. On the next slide, I'll just give you a couple of snippets of each of these 3 types of collaboration. So on this first bucket around growing reach and strengthening impact, we have a few examples that are sort of have been in recent years or are currently active collaborations. I spoke a little bit to this first one on the left, far left here. We really try to find membership organizations with broad networks, broad reach, big visibility, to really amplify the voices of direct service providers. So today, even we're supporting Chiefs for Change, which is a membership organization of state chiefs, in partnership with a handful of our professional learning organizations, so that state chiefs can be more aware of the impact of those organizations and how they can be leveraged in state contexts. So really sort of pairing people together to elevate the voices of grantees. The second is a really interesting partnership and collaboration that has been going on for a few years now, which is utilizing or leveraging the Center for Translational Neuroscience to really help provide technical assistance to direct service providers who are trying to get up the sort of ramp on what should we measure, how should we measure it, how can we better understand our own impact for families and for kids. And so that's a direct sort of technical assistance partnership that we facilitate for grantees. And then the third one here on the far right is an example where we actually have worked in partnership with a handful of other funders to bring grantees together who are doing very similar work in what we call a research practice partnership. So practitioners can come to the table with researchers to understand to design and understand a collective research agenda. Questions like what types of professional learning are most impactful for teachers, what dosage, what cost for which kids and which communities in what ways. And so it can really leverage the power of collaboration and community. On the next slide, I'll just highlight one example since these ones are a little bit more similar. But just bringing grantees together, our early childhood portfolio, many of you probably know Carly Roberts and Stephanie Sharp on our team, who have convened our direct service providers together for many years now. And those grantees during those convenings, what they would really elevate them to do is to highlight where they're strong, where they have opportunities for growth, and partner them together to share key lessons and problem solve with one another. Especially if they're doing similar types of work or are in similar stages of organizational growth. We know that early stage challenges tend to be very similar, growth stage challenges tend to be pretty similar. So the more our grantees have a community to sort of help them problem solve, the better. And then on the last slide, the last example that I'll just share is we really think that we are privileged to have an incredible platform that we can use to promote and share the voices of our grantees and their constituents. And so we do as much as we can to host webinars and conferences with you all at CGLR and with others, whether it's through blogs or newsletters and social media, and even just bringing other peers to the table to share great ideas or great work that we think is happening in the sector. We do take a deep responsibility to helping elevate great ideas in service of impact for kids.
I love that, and kind of the theme of kind of learning with and from each other through the webinars, but also bringing together similar providers so that they can share with and figure out ways to address shared challenges together. So turning back to you now, Brenda, if I could, can you tell us a little bit about the model convening that Pritzker supported that brought together leaders from leading childhood models to increase collaboration between those models? What were you seeking to achieve through that effort, and what emerged from it?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to speak about that. This is one specific piece of collaboration that we focused on. So when we started our work we work in 20 states and 10 communities, one of the things that we noticed was that we had a group of organizations on the ground programmatically that were almost everywhere we started to work. And that group was Family Connects, Healthy Steps, the Nurse Family Partnership, and Help Me Grow. And so we began to ask the question about how might these organizations work together and collaborate with each other to see if there was a way to get to shared outcomes across the model and across all these models. And I think that happens in a lot of different communities, that we look at what's on the ground and then we say, well, how can we come to some shared outcomes to look at the work that we're trying to achieve? So back in 2019, we asked these models to come together with the goal of creating an operational framework of how 4 of the largest early childhood intervention programs could better align. And so that was our goal. And what we asked them to do was sit down and think about how can you, as the model conveners, how can you begin to overlap and align and integrate and coordinate the work that you're doing on the ground, and be able to do that across the country. The ending result of the model convening is the hand-in-hand community framework for early childhood collaboration. And it basically is looking at and recognizing that there's some essential pieces that need to be in place in order to do collaboration in early childhood, so that you can do the most good for the most families, and especially the families that have the greatest challenges and obstacles and barriers to overcome. So the framework ended up bringing out 3 pieces. One is about building the foundation that needs to be present, which is about values and process and leadership, resource relationships, and how do you nurture that collaboration over time. The second piece is around relationships, and this element is really about how do you bring all these various roles together as they work with families and organizations, create a network in the community at large. And then the third piece is actions, the tangible steps that you have to take together to address immediate issues that are impacting families, as well as developing policies and systems of supports and services. And the actual document, the framework, lays out 9 guiding principles to this work. And I think that what I want to say is that through all of this work and coming together with these 4 different models, focusing the work at the community level for how you align was much easier to do than focusing that work at the model level, at the national level about alignment, right? And so I think that the same thing happens in communities. For years, I've been talking about collaboration and the time and the trust and the turf, the 3 T's that go into that. And they were able to focus in at the local level on how to do that. It's still a challenge at the national level about how to bring models that have a specific goal that they're all going for, many of which have RCTs in place, and look at the fidelity of the model. And then how do you create this synergy by saying, here's where we can share outcomes, report data together, and create a different blend of how we're looking at what's happening through our models in communities. So we didn't get to the place that we wanted to get, which was how do we do that across at the national level? But clearly there was a lot of looking at the local level and great examples in the framework about how that happens and how that works. I still think we want to explore, how do you do this at a national level? How do you take these different programs and create a model at the national level so the local communities don't have to go back and do that?
I love that there's so much that can be learned when we're going for one thing and end up with something else. I mean, it's wonderful the connections made at the local level, but learning what works and what doesn't, what else, what tweaks need to be made to really create that collaboration at the national level. That's wonderful. And I'm getting so many questions popping into my head that I would love to ask you. I'm sure other folks who are listening in are as well. I'd encourage everyone to be posting questions in the Q&A box for all of our panelists. We'll be turning to those in the last 30 minutes of the conversation. But for right now, I'd like to invite our local funders into the conversation with us today. We've just heard our partners at Overdeck and Pritzker Children's Initiative describe their efforts to foster collaboration at the national level. And so I'd love to explore a little bit about what this looks like at the local level, wondering if you've had similar experiences as Brenda was describing about being able to get partners to come together at the local level versus the national level. So inviting in now Sarah McBrome from the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation and Rebecca Sizik from the Bainham Family Foundation. Starting with you first, if we could, Sarah. We heard Anu describe how Overdeck is building an ecosystem of supports, which seems seemed a little bit similar to me about the work that Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation is doing to kind of build this grid of resources to support kids and families in the state of Arkansas, using both place-based efforts at the community level and state-level policy advocacy. So can you tell us a little bit about Excel by 8, Arkansas's campaign for grade level reading, and how you're promoting collaboration among partners and funders across the state?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for inviting me to join this conversation. And absolutely, a lot of what's already been said resonates with me. A little bit about Excel by 8, or what we call E8 for short. As you mentioned, it began as the Arkansas campaign for grade level reading, and third grade literacy is still a priority. And so with Excel by 8, this initiative is focused on building a reliable resource grid where all Arkansas families and communities have what they need to help children thrive. And really, we're focused on three big things with Excel by 8. We work deeply in a handful of communities across the state to build resident-driven models for change. We focus a lot of energy on changing narratives and building public and political will, and then really identifying policy barriers and advancing state and local policies that strengthen communities' grid of resources. So when I think about how the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation is promoting collaboration within Excel by 8, 5 things come to mind, and some of these have already been suggested by some of the other panelists. Just, first and foremost, I think it's articulating this shared vision. And so in order to collaborate, I think all stakeholders need to understand that North Star, even if they're focusing on kind of discrete pieces of it. And so that's why I love the E8 grid that's linked on their website if you want to check it out. So they've illustrated basically what's their theory of change as an electric grid. And it speaks to the comprehensive, even 2-generational things that need to be in place for children to thrive. But also this electric grid metaphor underscores that these things not only need to be there, but they need to be well connected, right? There can't be like a downed line or a patchy flow, so to speak. So I love this grid and the metaphor, and I think it in and of itself fosters collaboration by clearly articulating this broad shared vision for everyone involved. Secondly, very simply, I think in order to promote collaboration, we fund it. So we've learned that collaboration takes real time and energy and labor. And we've, seen many a task force and working group in our day kind of fall apart because of lack of like a dedicated collaborator, a dedicated coordinator. So we've done many grants or even part-time contracts with skilled collaborators in order to promote collaboration. And with Excel by 8, we're doing just that. Nearly all of our funding goes towards individuals whose job is to coordinate, engage stakeholders, facilitate meetings, kind of do that outreach, follow up on next steps. And with Excel by 8, we're funding a statewide coordinator and also teams of local coordinators in each community around the state so that there's that dedicated person fostering collaboration and engagement. So that's my number 2. My third suggestion would be to use intermediaries to create collaborative tables and foster shared decision making. So this speaks to kind of the collective impact model. I think as funders, our default might be to provide grants to nonprofits, right? That's what we do. But whether you're funding a single nonprofit or several, I think that funding approach can sometimes perpetuate siloing, and grants to individual nonprofits also by design give decision-making power to that organization's ED or his or her board on how to move the work forward instead of to the collaborative. So with Excel by 8, our funding goes to the Arkansas Community Foundation. The Community Foundation contracts with our coordinators, and those coordinators are pulling together these large collaboratives of 30 plus nonprofits, state level partners, parents, policymakers, and the like to collaborate and make decisions collectively on how to advance the work. So really kind of creating that governance structure to kind of fund collaboration and shared decision-making in that way. I think one other thing I'd offer that's been mentioned is building trusting relationships and really focusing on inclusion and equity in those relationship building. So I think like with many things, when it comes to collaboration, we could say it moves at the speed of trust, right? So carving out time and resources and people to build relationships with stakeholders, understand their needs, do the one-on-one is crucial. And with Excel by 8, that collaborative has gone through an external equity audit process, which I think was really important to understand and unpack any blind spots, biases, and opportunities to build a more inclusive conversation. So I think that's important, especially with diverse stakeholders if you're trying to collaborate. And then my very last practical suggestion is just to provide long-term flexible funding to partners. WRF has been funding Excel by 8 for nearly a decade, and we provide 2-year grants, and we'd love to do more with a single budget line item that says it's for flexible funding. And I think since we are primarily funding this backbone, like infrastructure, so to speak, it's really important for all of our partners to feel our commitment so that they have room to innovate, to pivot, and to collaborate. Because, you know, it takes time and energy, and it just may not be worth it if the funding is short-term or overly prescriptive. So we're big proponents of flexible funding. So those are the top 5 things that came to mind, kind of practical suggestions from our experience here in Arkansas.
Those are wonderful insights, very kind of overarching, but really concrete and actionable. Thank you for that. Love to turn to you and invite you into the conversation now, Rebecca. What has resonated with you in the approaches and strategies that you've just heard and insights that you've just heard Brenda, Anu, and Sarah offer up? How is the Bainham Family Foundation working in DC to encourage collaboration among grantees, funder partners, and even the residents of the focus neighborhoods where you're working in ways that support not just the early childhood development, but include that kind of whole child, whole family, whole community approach?
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, colleagues. I don't know if I'm hungry or what, but the pinch and the snippet is making me think of a chef metaphor and cooking metaphor, and it makes me think of how my Nana taught me to cook with my hands, and I don't know how much you'll see them in the video, but it's also making me think of that there's an art and a science to cooking, just like it's not so science, this collaboration that we're talking about. And so I'm just so grateful to those who have shared some of these different ideas and what has worked and when it got a little too spicy and not spicy enough. So I may use that metaphor too much over the next few minutes, but it really resonated. At the Bainham Family Foundation, very similar to what you've heard from my colleagues so far, we are primarily focused on supporting families with young children as well. And we're seeking to build an equitable society that supports all children and families, particularly children and families of color who have been systematically excluded from power and resources so that all children can thrive. And we've been doing a lot of introspection the last several years, really thinking about and recognizing that we need to engage more authentically and relationally with community partners and community residents, and generally show up differently. We want to show up as a funder who is here to listen and follow community lead versus impose and dictate our own solutions, possibly from our own hypothesis. And so what you see on the slide here, we really were inspired by the concepts in this Power Moves article to really think about all the different facets of power. So rather than the more traditional model of, like, as I said, kind of developing a solution, handing off a solution for partners and community residents to execute, we want to more intentionally recognize the community's existing assets and power, the experiential power to build effective solutions. We also want to name and understand our own power as funders and talk about kind of all of those pieces of power. And my colleagues gave a couple of examples. Sarah just talked about actually funding collaboration. You know, that is something that we have the resources to do to come alongside our partner and communities. So through a suite of supports, we're really thinking about not as much the what, but how we show up and really come alongside and co-create solutions with our partners. So just here's 2 examples. And the first one on the next slide is we're using a human-centered design approach. Our early child care team is I should say, really to center families, educators, and administrators, viewing them as the experts with lived experience, that they can identify solutions that move us towards a more equitable, coherent childcare system in DC. The foundation is partnering with a facilitator to help facilitate those sessions, to develop prototype solutions to persistent, different pain points, et cetera. And so as I mentioned, the family, educators, and administrators are centered, involved, and benefiting from key decision points throughout this entire collective conversation. And this really is a collective group thinking beyond the current realities, imagining what can be. There also will be, a feasibility kind of research done on the implementation of each idea. And so this is where different forms of power can play. And so in this example, we're going to have local and federal policy experts who will provide feedback on the feasibility. That's all they're going to do, though. They're going to provide feedback and ideas on feasibility, but they're not going to, they're not going to take the place of the ideas and the solutions. So where we as funders are playing is really being part of that conversation, but also helping to document learning for all of us, for the entire process, the broader community, and we can share lessons through the broader field. And I heard that from my other colleagues, a lot of how can we help facilitate shared learning and then the sharing of that shared learning. And so another example that the foundation, and these are both current examples, is our Ward 8 Community Economic Development Planning process. And on the next slide, you'll see a ton of organizations who are working collectively. This is a community-led effort to build a plan that will align healthcare and community economic development systems. So it's a community-led, community-focused, equity-informed process for making ongoing economic development decisions, particularly in Ward 8 of DC, but we really believe it will have scalable, opportunities across DC. So this is also a human-centered design process at its core. Officially, it was kicked off in spring of 2021 as a full-year planning effort, but this is building upon decades worth of work from many community residents and community leaders. And now there is funding to really kind of build on the momentum of this moment. So just a couple of ways community is involved and residents and community leaders are involved. Community members are being trained to collect data during the planning phase. They will be compensated to do so. Additionally, the residents will be self-defining both the assets and the needs of the community. So again, placing the residents at the center of decision-making, informing, and then these will inform the decisions about how investments are made going forward. So as you can see, there's a large steering committee that's represented across the district, and we're serving as partners in planning, again, co-creating ideas and plans and strategies, but to especially leverage the powerhouse within community. So we're learning together here. Another way that we're supporting efforts is by looking at how we can bring in other funders, bring in additional funds. There's some amazing opportunity from the federal government right now. And so we can help with the capacity to apply for some of those. There's a regional grant opportunity, for example, around community development. So as you can, hopefully what you're hearing is aligned with my colleagues. This approach is less funder driven, and we're just working in conjunction, coming alongside these great partners to best understand what outcomes we can advance, but also really holding ourselves accountable to how we're showing up as funders.
I love that. Thank you so much. Before we transition to hearing from the practitioners that we have joining us today, I'd love to just do a quick round robin of all of the funder partners that we have with us today, reflecting on each of your respective efforts to promote collaboration at the national and local levels to achieve those bigger, better outcomes that we all want for kids. What resonated with you in terms of what you just heard from your colleagues? Any quick reflections, insights, takeaways that you'd like to share? And we'll go in the order of presentations to this point. So starting with you first, Celine, and then to you, Brenda.
I mean, everything that I heard was about time, about trust, about ongoing nature, and that these are not, we don't come up with solutions and then we're done. And so, I always, when I was in graduate school, I read a study called Steady Work. And basically it said, the work of educational improvement is going to be your life's work if you so choose it. And that's what I heard in here, is that this is the time, trust, and ongoing.
Not to Brenda.
I'm reminded again of how much we are still learning about what it takes to deeply collaborate with each other, and that always capturing the knowledge of, what went well, what didn't, what would we have done differently. This learning aspect of our work is critical to our being able as funders to support our partners in doing it and to figure out all the different places we can plug that support in.
Relationships are hard sometimes. Anu.
I don't have too much to add. I think those are great amplifications. Maybe the one thing I'll just say that we've learned through the partnerships that we've already seeded is just that things will always take longer than you think. And the partnerships will not be linear. There's going to be steps forward and steps back, and that's a part of the collaboration process, a part of the relationship building process. It's a part of, as Sarah mentioned, like funding the learning and the flexible capital and time just to give people the space to figure things out. So maybe those are just two pieces that I would add.
How about you, Sarah?
Yeah, I really, maybe two things. I mean, I spoke to shared decision making, but I think the piece on shared learning and kind of the iterative nature of the human-centered design is a really important piece too, having this whole ecosystem kind of evolving together. And at the heart of that empathy piece, I think, is so not giving lip service to collaboration, but like if you don't really know and understand your fellow stakeholders, you're going to be limited. So that deep kind of authentic partnership, I think, is important.
I would say, in addition to that, or kind of similar to that, because it's ongoing, because it's not linear, let's not ever assume, and let's keep asking, what do you need from us, rather than making assumptions. Our last one I just mentioned, we assumed we're going to just give you the money, we're going to get out of your way, you don't need us. And we actually were told, no, we actually do need this, A, B, and C. So we still made an assumption with the best of intentions. And so I would just say, let's keep asking and not assuming, what do you need from us, and keep doing that along the way, knowing it's not going to be linear, knowing we're going to be learning, and then adjusting that. What do you need might have new answers.
I love that. Even best intentions, we think we're making the right choices to get out of the way, and it doesn't always work that way. Thank you all. Stick around. We're going to have you come back for some more insights and Q&A later on in the conversation. But now I'd like to invite our practitioner partners who are on the panel today to join us. So if Natalie Tackett from 0 to 3 and Healthy Steps, and Catherine Carell from Lena, hello. So we've just heard our philanthropic leaders describe how they are encouraging and creating opportunities for increased collaboration. So I'm interested to hear from each of you as practitioners, what would be helpful as you and your program seek to strengthen connections and relationships with other providers. As you listen to the funders on the panel today, just share what resonated with you. And we'll start with you maybe first, Natalie. As the Healthy Steps coordinator in North Carolina, I know your work might have been affected somewhat by that model convening that Brenda was describing and the hand-in-hand framework that came out of it. Can you tell us about the collaborative effort that you're a part of in Guilford County, North Carolina, and what impact hand-in-hand framework might have had on your work there and other insights around collaboration?
I'd be happy to. Thank you very much for asking. And one of the big things that's happening in Guilford right now as we speak is a big thunderstorm. So if I cut out, I will try to call back in. My power has flickered a few times, which is just wonderful timing. The work that's happening in Guilford County is so exciting, and it's kind of like an in vivo project that's happening in coordination with the conversations that were just held by the funders. We are living what was just discussed, and it's just awesome. We have a huge project that started as a grassroots effort. It has evolved to include all members of the Guilford County community. And if you, I think that you do have the link already in there. It's called Ready for School, Ready for Life, locally known as Ready Ready. So Ready Ready is impacting all parts of the community, starting prenatal through age 3 for phase 1. And we are getting ready to look at ages 3 to 5 and then up to age 8. So it's really very similar to a lot of the other projects that are happening nationally. And we have learned a lot of the same lessons that have been learned nationally related to building collaborative work. One of the things that we have learned from Hand in Hand, or benefited in Guilford County from Hand in Hand, is the work of Healthy Steps in collaboration with Nurse Family Partnership and Family Connects is happening on the ground. We were watching it happen or being supported by our national leaders. So our national leaders were going through the same collaborative pains to create these relationships, to learn these lessons and build that trust that Brenda had talked about, that the building of the trust is a really big deal. And I think that at the national level is a version of what happens at the local level. We have Healthy Steps was the new kid on the block in Guilford County. Family Connects and Nurse Family Partnership had existed for a long time. So they had already established a pretty good working relationship, but it was not a real collaboration. So in coming together to collaborate, what we were able to learn was a lot of the same lessons that our leaders were learning, in that we couldn't just coordinate, we couldn't just network, it had to be a real collaboration, and it took time and it took energy and it took actually adding some team members, because if your job is already filling all your time and now you're asked to build a collaborative, how do you do that? Where do you find the time? So it was very affirming to me to just hear the conversation about the resources needed to build that work. I do think that we were able to contribute to the development of the Hand in Hand network from our local experiences. We were able to share some concrete examples of how we have built some collaborative work, some challenges that we faced to do that, some basic communication things. I think about if a family is with Nurse Family Partnership and they're also with Healthy Steps, and both of the specialist, the Healthy Steps specialist, and the nurse are trying to support that family, how do we do that and not be redundant? Everybody doesn't need to make that same referral to the housing authority. We need to be sure that we're communicating and we're working together, and that takes time and energy and new systems. And so that's what we've been able to see happen here in Guilford. So many of the things that I had in my notes that I was going to talk about were mentioned by all the funders, and that was just wonderful to hear. But I do think that I love Brenda's phrase, and I think it's going to stick with me forever, is the time, trust, and turf. And how do we share all of those things and support one another with all of those things?
I appreciate that. Thank you. Turning to you now, Catherine. So Lena is a part of that ecosystem that Anu was describing in her comments earlier in the session. How does being a part of that ecosystem affect Lena's connections and collaborations with other practitioners? And how does it affect your ability to support children's language and literacy development?
Sure. So here it's all the same reasons that Lena has community conversations with its partners. It's all the benefits of the network that we've indirectly and directly referenced. So trust building, increasing diversity of perspectives, and increasing the efficiency of problem solving. We don't want our implementing partners to be solving problems on their own, and we want them to feel supported. And so that's also something as an organization that benefits us. And they're all the reasons why an ecosystem like Overdex for their portfolio members are really crucial for organizations like us. We've many times turned to organizations within Overdex ecosystem and in those of our other funders and said, hey, we're struggling with X. How have you staffed around this? How have you revisited your success metrics in light of Y? And Celine mentioned that this is even more important during the pandemic, and we completely felt that. With unprecedented challenges, it was critical that funders were helping their grantees to collaborate to solve what emerged as universal obstacles that were not expected. It sort of came out of nowhere to a certain extent. And lift up to funders ways they could be most supportive in completely new ways as well. So that was all a collaborative learning process. And sometimes with that, it was just a gut check on what other organizations were experiencing. So we knew what to put energy into and what waves of uncertainty to ride out. I think what's important though, is that the ecosystem is organic. So if a funder like Overdeck has a cohesive strategy, then this usually happens. But if a funder supports many disparate causes, then the push to collaborate can feel forced or sort of time consuming. And so it shouldn't be collaboration to check a box. If a funder has many disparate organizations they support, and we're part of some of those ecosystems too, then I think it's important to segment them out and say these are the reasons why they might connect well with each other. And to that end, it's always helpful when a funder brainstorms productive collaborations. And Anu mentioned this because I think it's something that Overdeck does really well, is what problems need solving and what organizations are in the best position to solve this together. And that's all the better if it's structured and facilitated by the funder, because the recap at the end of the funder discussion was all about how much time it takes, how much energy it takes, how much relationship building is really, it can be a full-time job. And so if the funder can sort of say, this is what it's going to look like, and this is how we're going to support this effort in an ongoing way, then that allows the organizations to focus on the actual content of the collaboration and not necessarily all of the capacity that goes into the scheduling, into the following up, and all of those sorts of things. And so I think, for example, you mentioned accessing federal funding streams. Something like that, collaborative discussions across organizations can be really enlightening, even if the organizations are addressing completely different lines of work, right? That there's all sort of common challenges there. And so those are some of just the recommendations that I would say coming out of the participation in an ecosystem like Overdeck's, is that they're incredibly important, but there needs to be a lot of strategy behind them.
I love those insights. The idea of figuring out who it makes sense to engage in collaboration, make sure that there is connections and there's alignment around vision and work, but then also looking for opportunities where maybe there's a shared opportunity or challenge accessing the federal funding, and maybe we're doing different pieces of work, but we can still learn together. There will be similar strategies. So you both were kind of getting into this a little bit in terms of advice. I'd love to hear more advice that you would offer to the funders who are listening into this conversation, not just the four who were presenting earlier, but what would be helpful to practitioners as they wrestle with these time, trust, and turf challenges around collaboration? And sticking with you for this question to start off, Catherine, I know that LENA is a national organization that works in collaboration with many local organizations in the implementation of your program. So, what are the dynamics there, and how could funders, both national and local funders, kind of be responsive to those dynamics to help strengthen those relationships between a national entity and a local entity working together?
Sure. So I'll explain a little bit about how it works for us and the reasons why it has worked, and then sort of like that overarching guidance that I have for funders. So LENA works at two levels: as a national organization looking for scaled impact, but also as part of a community's approach to improving child outcomes. So a funder like Overdeck's support is really critical to healthy national and local collaboration. We have foundational support so we can collaborate and support those local organizations instead of each partnership also being a competition for local funding, because that really affects the dynamics. And it helps with three things. So firstly, we have the flexibility to assist if a project requires more technical assistance or resources above a specific budget. We can keep our costs lower for partners to participate. And I think importantly, this question, we have the runway to develop larger collaborative local projects earlier before local funding for direct service might kick in. Because that's also a dynamic to look at too, is many local funders do support solely direct service to that community and might not afford the type of funding that you really need to develop collaborative projects. Winthrop and the Accelerate 8 sort of take that out, but by and large, there are many local funders that do that direct service funding. And that means that we're not only setting up siloed LENA programming for early adopters or those most well-resourced partners, but we're designing projects that impact child outcomes at the community level, and we're leveraging a national funder's interest in those systems to do that. We're doing this in Memphis, for example, with the Urban Child Institute, but using, of course, the support of our national funders to lend as much additional planning and research capacity as we can to that direct service element. So we often feel the tension of a national program sort of being dropped in a local community. And so it's critical that the dynamics on the ground are healthy. So my suggestion for funders nationally and locally is exactly really what Sarah was talking about, is to look at how the politics or the mechanics of funding are impacting the collaboration and how they're impacting the success.
That's wonderful. Thank you. What about you, Natalie? What advice would you offer?
I think that I would echo a lot of what Catherine had to say. I would also want to say that engaging in conversations with the direct service providers by the funders is beneficial to funders. I think that having a chance to speak directly to the people who are providing the direct service is eye-opening and actually very inspiring. We have found with our funders that when they have a chance to connect directly with Healthy Steps specialists, they learn a lot. And they are more and more impressed with the work that happens. I think also it's very important for funders to understand, and I had heard this, I think, earlier today, as well as in the previous webinar, that money has to be invested for a long term. It has to be, it can't be, nothing happens in 6 months, a year, 3 years. Even 3 years is not enough time to really build a strong collaborative relationship. As well as partnering with our national office, working and having conversations in addition to the direct service providers, but with the local on the ground executive directors or coordinators of that EBP or local, a local nonprofit, whoever is coordinating it, to help them have the conversations that cut to the roots of what's standing in the way of collaboration. So one of the conversations earlier was that as funders, you want to just give the money, previous school of thought, give the money and get out of the way. But in fact, a supportive funder who says, if this way didn't work and it was all a mistake, all right, what do we need to do to regroup? How do we restart in a way that's going to be more successful, learning from the time and money we just spent to do it a way that didn't work? What do we do now? So, but I think having those direct conversations and giving the confidence to the local leaders that it is okay if your end of year report or quarterly report isn't all about success. It might include, this was really challenging and we haven't figured it out. We would love your help. So for funders to nurture that, I feel that I'm very fortunate in Guilford that our funders, and as well as my national office, is very open to that knowledge that we are learning. Every mistake that we make, every unsuccessful project or week or month is the next step to that most successful project. So I really think that that's helpful for funders, even if they already know this, to be sure they communicate it effectively to the people they're funding.
I love that. That's such a critical insight, that every mistake, everything that doesn't achieve the goal that we set out to do is an opportunity to learn what could we do better to strengthen it. And so that openness and communicating that openness, as you said, is so important. So before we transition to Q&A, I'd love to open it up and invite all of our panelists to join us back on the screen. We'll go back to the Brady Bunch effect right now. So I'd love to invite each of you to kind of share some reflections on what you have heard in the conversation up to this point. Any thoughts about this moment in time? Celine was talking about the way that funders are responding to COVID-19 and the pandemic, when so many of us feel so stretched, and thinking about all the time that it takes to build those relationships. What are your insights on that? Or recognizing that, again, there's lessons to be learned from things that didn't go exactly as we had intended or hoped. Any insights that you could share, lessons learned from efforts that were attempted and maybe did not go as planned, but can provide wonderful fodder for learning about what to do better next time. And so maybe we'll follow this, we'll start with Rebecca and then go to Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Gosh, I think it's kind of just a reflection on accountability is what I'm thinking about. You mentioned, Celine, I had that written down too, that this is a moment of inflection. And I also wrote down something that Catherine said so beautifully, something like, we don't need collaboration, that's just check the box collaboration. And so what I'm really thinking about is how will we as funders seize this moment together in a sustainable way? And how do we move from really great intent to really aligned action, to aligned sustained actions, than to impact. And really, how do we hold ourselves accountable when we get into some of the actual practices that are going to get uncomfortable? There's going to be moments when we don't want to let go of control. I don't know what the we is, right? It could be something very small about, oh, we've always asked that thing on the partner report. Or we've always asked the partners to type in the report in a Word document. Whatever it may be, I think we really, that's what I'm asking is, how can we take some of these amazing insights and this momentum and not just pay lip service and continue to work in a sustainable way? I'll just add one example of that I've been hearing from a different cohort is around a lot of the commitment to racial equity and in the racial reckoning of spring of, my goodness, 2020. I've lost all sense of time. You know, we came out as funders in full force but some of the actions, you know, are not always aligning to that intent and to the lip service that was paid. So how can we think about collaboration and really live it and challenge? And I love what Natalie said just recently, like, how do we keep asking those questions so that we are sustaining this?
Sarah, you want to jump in?
Sure. Two things I'm thinking about in this a moment. I mean, one thing that I didn't mention that may have been absent from this conversation too, when it comes to collaboration, we're really learning a lot and testing a lot around narrative change. And I think there's a piece that maybe had been missing in the past as we tried to foster collaboration around really grounding the coalition or collaborative in, you know, what stories are we telling ourselves? What myths are informing our solutions? And how do we rethink, how do we rethink those stories we tell ourselves about parenting, about deservedness, about policy solutions that are right, whether it's across politics or other divides, and kind of open the space to rethink that. I think that can be transformative and kind of what the collaboration that comes from that. I also think your point about everyone being a bit fatigued in this moment is real. At the same time, I feel like there is a lot of activity at the federal level and funding flowing into the state level was from where I sit. So I think that's a real opportunity to latch on to something meaningful and meaty that's really happening. And you know, that everyone has to be collaborating about like informing how those funds are used in a way that benefits children. So those are my two thoughts after hearing everyone chat.
Well, speaking of this moment in time and the impact that it's having on funders in responding, but also all of the grantees and the partners that funders are supporting, just wanted to share a link and encourage folks to register for a special funder-to-funder conversation that we have scheduled for the first Tuesday in October 5th. I just posted the link in the chat box. Typically, our funder-to-funder conversations are the third Tuesday, like we are today. Recognizing that we all thought this fall was going to be a little bit different. You know, we were focusing on slowing, stopping, and reversing learning loss last fall. And then this summer, you know, everything was opening up and we were transitioning to a focus on equitable learning recovery. And then this fall happened. And so recognizing that, you know, school systems, grantees, funders have been going at 200% for so long, and trying to understand how to grapple with the disaster that is COVID, as well as these other disasters that are happening at the same time. We've scheduled this special funder-to-funder conversation that will include Sally Ray from the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, talking about, you know, the mental health opportunities and needs as a part of a recovery response, as well as, you know, the long range funding and support through recovery. And we'll also have Ann Kubish with the Ford Family Foundation in Oregon, who has a lot of expertise and experience in responding to layered disasters, you know, fires in that community, the pandemic, as well as a school shooting at a community college. So they would want me to share that they're not experts. They're wrestling with this as we are, but I would just invite all of the funders on the conversation with us today to make plans to join us for that special funder-to-funder conversation. So now I am going to end my commercial break and turn it back over to you. Brenda, what would be some of your thoughts or insights, both responding to COVID-19 and collaboration in this moment, and or lessons learned? You shared with the model convening how you were going for something, but you came up with something wonderful, but it was different from what you had intended. Any other types of insights that you'd like to offer?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So I want to, I'd like to challenge us all to think about the language we use about what's been going on since the pandemic started, and with our what we often call our racial reckoning. And I'm not sure that we're at an inflection point. I think we're at a transition and transformative moment in time, which is a little bit different than an inflection point for me. And we've been talking about, and I think it connects directly into the work that we're talking about doing, that there's something different when we all begin to lean into funding with an equity frame and aspiring to fund with a justice frame, right? And what I keep saying is, so if we're doing that, what are all the things that change as a result of making this commitment? And I think one of the things that is changing is how do we, when we think about collaboration, we're no longer just thinking about collaboration of the providers at the table or this group at the table. I think we're leaning into what Rebecca was talking about very much. And we are exploring, what does it mean to use a human-centered design? What does it mean if we use it? What does it mean to support our grantee partners using it? I think we're really leaning into that question about what does it mean to include parents and family in leadership, not in a survey or a poll or a once-a-year focus group, but what does it mean to co-create and develop solutions that are all about lifting family voice and having parents and families tell us what we need to be doing as advocates, as electeds, as funders. I think we're really in this amazing time of exploring that for ourselves internally and asking, so what would that look like? What would it, how would we do that? And really being open to all those things. And I think, in terms of the biggest lesson that I think we've learned during this time for ourselves around collaboration is, I mentioned that we had this planning grant that everybody did before they got their implementation grant. And part of their implementation grant was talking about their collaborative, their coalition, who's at your table, and all of those things. And on paper, that looks really wonderful and astounding. And then when the rubber hits the road, the keeping everybody engaged, keeping everybody feeling like there's a shared accountability, there was something that we missed there. And so that's one of the things we keep asking ourselves, how do we really support that it stays a collaborative effort? How do we keep everybody at the table? And how do we build those tables big enough to be able to share the power and really do that in a way that brings all the sectors together? I'm constantly reminded of the fact that parents do not think of the children in the siloed way that we provide programmatic services or we fund. And so I keep saying, how do we shrink those silos so parents have a seamless system that's integrated, coordinated, and aligned, because that's what families need. That's what parents need.
I love that. Appreciate the comments around the focus on justice and racial justice and power. And yes, children, parents don't see them as just 0 to 3 or 3 to 5 or K through 3. Important to remember that and structure our systems and our supports in response to that. Anu, what would you add?
But thinking about what else I could add to the conversation, there's so many great points that you all are raising. I think the last thing I'll just say is that I think Celine mentioned this at the very start. The landscape is changing so fast. Every day there's sort of a new way to think about what's happening on the ground, how to best be a support, how to bring people together. And so the pace of change and the pace of just what's required to adapt and innovate in this moment is faster than we've seen in a long time. And so the time challenge and the challenges of collaboration are just that much more amplified, if you will. And so I guess that what I'll just say is that that one of the things that we have found to be incredibly helpful, and I think has also just helped us be more aware of what's happening, is actually really forcing ourselves to speak to funders, read as much as we can, speak to our grantees, get just a really wide vantage point of what's happening at many levels, at the federal level, at the state level, at the district level, at the community level, to better understand, so we're not duplicating efforts, and that we're not, because things are changing so fast. I think one of the amazing things about being in a philanthropic seat, and one of the privileges of this seat, is that the vantage point or the macro view is a real sort of an opportunity for us to help connect the dots for folks, or just to say, someone else is thinking about this too. Let's help you connect the dots here, or let's help get you up to speed on this challenge more quickly. Just because everything is changing so quickly, the more we can help folks connect and get up to speed, the better. So I'll just add that we see our role as sort of helping to grease the wheels in some way for grantees, for leaders who just don't have the time to lift up and beyond the day-to-day work, because the day-to-day challenges are so real right now. And so just the more that we can keep doing that, the more I would challenge us all to do that.
Very important insight to share that. I mean, adaptation, everybody's adapting, it seems like every 15 minutes, and providing support so that, for the folks on the ground. Celine, what would you, and actually before you respond, just wanted to note that the evaluation poll has popped up on your screen. So I'd encourage everyone who's listening in today to take just a quick moment while we continue the conversation to share your feedback with us through that poll. It really does help us with our commitment to continuous improvement. So while we continue learning and talking together, just take a quick second on that. Thanks. Now to you, Celine, what would you share in terms of reflections on the conversation?
Well, I was just going to add, so we've been talking about this, how the landscape is changing rapidly, how there are new nonprofit partner players. And I'll say, before my role at Grantmakers for Education, I founded and ran a national education nonprofit for 10 years. And there's a word that we haven't spoken about that we've walked up to the line on a whole bunch of times in this conversation, and it's competition. And so that's the flip side of collaboration. As a nonprofit leader, I was competitive with folks in my space, in my ecosystem. And so there was this challenge on the one hand of you need to collaborate to get the work done at scale. And you also need to recognize that if the other guys are the ones that are recognized as doing the most path-breaking work or reaching the most people, they're going to get more funding. And so I think that's a hard conversation, I think, for funders to have and engage in. It's a hard conversation for nonprofits to proactively talk about with their funder partners. And so I just wanted to kind of inject that, because that to me is a real barrier on the road to authentic collaboration.
It is hard to have a trusting relationship with somebody who is also seeking similar funding streams that you are. That is very important. Thank you so much for lifting that up. Natalie, coming back to kind of that practitioner perspective, somebody who might be going after grants with folks that could be seen as competitors, what are some of your reflections on today's conversation? Any kind of reflections on this moment in time, attempting to collaborate, or on lessons learned, or just any reflections from today's conversation that you'd share?
I think at this moment in time, everyone is so much engaged in the struggle to keep their heads above water. And my work is, Healthy Steps is directly placed in pediatric practices. It's really been a hard year and a half. They are stretched beyond words. So that's one thing that I think we all just need to be gentle with each other. Celine's point about competition is real. And that's where I think on the ground level with other direct service providers, a lot of the trust building takes a really long time. And we have to allow for that. Sarah, I think, made a great point, Sarah McBroom, about the having a backbone organization that coordinates, and that way it does remove a little bit of the competition if you have a separate entity, and that's what we have in Guilford with Ready Ready, if you have a chance to look. And then the other point, I think, in building collaborative relationships, if going back to the hand-in-hand framework, there is a list of questions that are good questions for the community to get the conversation started that I think were very helpful in when I read them, but I don't think they are just read once at the beginning of a collaboration. They need to be revisited because, as several people said, everything changes. Anu, I think you said it's everything every 15 minutes, there's a whole new plan. And so revisiting the questions in that document are actually a good start to the conversation to have in a community.
And then to you, Catherine, what would you add?
Sure. I mean, so many great points. I wish I could respond to everyone who came before me. But I think what's going on in my head right now is really that in order for us to have competition and model competition, have it in our communities outside of this dynamic between funder and practitioner, that we as funders and practitioners need to collaborate more with each other to these ends. That the dynamics of that relationship really need to be set on incentivizing what we're talking about, whether it be racial equity, whether it be collaboration, not just after the funding is received, but as the projects are being developed. So how are we kind of modeling that as we work with funders and as we work as practitioners together to make sure that from the outset that projects are developed with the on the ground perspective. So to Brenda's point, that we are listening to the voices on the ground, that the project is grounded in collaboration, that we're being transparent about things like competition. And so we're building trust between practitioners and funders. And that also that the funders are welcome to provide feedback on how we can increase collaboration on projects based on the macro perspective that Anu brought up. And so I think it's just really kind of revisiting and reflecting all of the time that we're not thinking about collaboration in one way. We're thinking about it in a more holistic way across all of the relationships that lead towards these type of projects and outcomes.
Thank you. I love that. So we are coming to the end, I guess, of our 90 minutes together. Unless any folks, any of the panelists have some last minute reflections that they'd like to offer, I'll invite Sierra Sanchez, our webinar producer, to bring up the slide with upcoming sessions. And then before everyone logs off, just one more quick reminder to take just a quick moment to share your thoughts and feedback through the survey poll that we posted just a few moments ago. And then I'd just like to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists who joined us today for taking the time to share all of your insights about what it takes to really build those strong relationships at any time, but certainly especially in this challenging moment that we're all going through. So thank you to Celine Coggins, to Brenda Blasingame, to Anu Malapatil, to Rebecca Sissick, to Sarah McBroom, to Natalie Tackett, and to Catherine Carell. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd also like to say thank you to all of the attendees who logged in and took a moment to join with us and learn with us in this moment. And I'd like to invite everyone to tune back in just a few minutes or later on this afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll have a conversation on the centrality of relationships, exploring how tutors, mentors, and coaches can be leveraged to support student learning and strengthen relationships between parents and teachers. And then I'd encourage everyone to make plans to join us again for another doubleheader next Tuesday, when we'll start off with a peer exchange, exploring the ways in which GLR communities are working to ensure digital access for all children in that earlier 12:30 p.m. Eastern time slot. And then followed by a session co-sponsored by New America, exploring what is behind the 10% drop in kindergarten enrollment nationwide and how district leaders are responding to it to make sure that children are enrolled enrolled in school and receiving the learning supports that they can. And then we'll kick off October with another doubleheader, starting with that special funder to funder conversation that I mentioned a moment ago, that will acknowledge the emotional trauma and the daunting challenges of the multiple disasters that communities across the country are dealing with, in the 12:30 p.m. Eastern time slot, followed by another session in partnership with Education Week and the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy, lifting up the importance of trauma-informed practices in the construction of the deep reading brain at 3 p.m. Eastern, from 3 till 4 p.m. Eastern time slot. So that's a little bit of a different time for normal sessions. Posted some registration links in the chat box, so I hope everyone saw those. And just thank you again to our amazing panel, and thank you to all who joined in to learn and listen with us. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and hope to see you back at 3 p.m. Eastern for our next session.